Good morning and welcome to the Eastern Mediterranean Times weekly newsletter podcast. I'm your host, Martin Mont.
And I'm your host, Joshua Litke.
All right, getting right into it. More calls for peace, negotiations for the hostages, and conflict in Gaza. Over the last week, President Biden has been working alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel in calls for a peaceful resolution to the conflict, as well as for hostage negotiations in order to return the Israeli hostages. 200 or so are still trapped within Gaza to this day. Qatar has also been working the negotiations as an intermediary between Hamas and Israel, and again, has been gaining some ground over the past week. The conflict still on the rise as more military aggression increases throughout the country. The Israeli assault has gotten all the way into some of the inner city parts of Gaza City and has gone to one of the largest hospitals within northern Gaza as well.
Yeah, there's fighting around the major hospital areas and a lot of the areas where people have kind of congregated for safe spaces, where we're seeing airstrikes, power outages, and a lot of humanitarian difficulties in these areas. And that's really spawned these pushes and calls for peace. We're seeing French President Macron change and move into a new direction away from fully supporting Israel to calling for a ceasefire. We're seeing the European Union echoing President Biden's sentiments of a humanitarian pause and calling for de-escalation in the conflict. So we're seeing this kind of shift away from full-out support for Israel to kind of just trying to ease the burdens of this conflict and stop the casualties.
Which this conflict has taken upwards of 12,000 lives in the last couple weeks. And a ceasefire would be able to get humanitarian aid in, which is increasingly necessary for the residents of Gaza.
Yeah, and it still remains a critical point for the United States, who are continuing to try to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza to help the overrun and struggling healthcare and food aid systems there.
Absolutely. On the flip side of this, the United States has conducted airstrike missions against an Iranian-backed militants in Syria. The United States has been more active in the region, as we've been seeing with this Gaza story we've been following, but Iranian-backed militant groups have been causing more and more problems for them in their Syrian missions of peacekeeping, especially in northern regions that are Kurdish controlled by different parties. The United States striking two regions yesterday with airstrikes, and the President Biden saying that nearly 50 Iraqis that are part of the Islamic resistance were killed during these strikes. They also were able to destroy weapons caches, and this fighting threatens even more than the Gaza situation, the diplomatic ties between Turkey and the United States, as Turkey is a big player in Syria and has their own goals that the United States has been trying to keep at bay for a little while. And these bombing raids show that the United States is planning on keeping its foothold, which was a question with if they were going to or not when we go back to Turkey and their response to the Ukrainian war, which is still ongoing. Their negotiations there, when it came to Ukraine, seemed to think that the United States would pull back out of Syria to some extent and have less of a focus on the region, which was a Turkish goal. But now it seems like that is definitely not the message from the White House. They're planning on keeping a foothold in Syria, and these militant strikes just kind of go back to that.
Yeah, for sure. We're looking at the United States sending their carrier groups as the conflict in Gaza is going on, and one of those groups, while it is off the coast of Israel, the other is right off the coast of Iran, and so we're seeing this push from the United States to ensure that they remain a very vocal and very present uh, force in the Middle East and in this region to ensure that U.S. interests continue to be met, and to ensure that Turkey and Iran and some of these other geopolitical players don't get too much power.
Yeah, and that power dynamic, you can see it clearly last week with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken going to Turkey and not being able to get a meeting with President Erdogan. That shows a disconnect and kind of a lack of diplomatic respect and trust. And these carrier groups are there to reinforce the American message in the region, as well as these airstrikes do as well. So
Yep.
it'll be an ongoing story for sure, and it'll probably last longer than the conflict in Gaza will. And that just goes to show that there will be a humanitarian toll in Syria as well.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to Greece, the Syriza party's leadership is beginning to show cracks, and it's exposing some of the problems within Greece's political left.
Yeah, we're seeing a splinter from the Syriza party, which has been the leading progressive left party for some years now, where the new leader, Kasalakis, has essentially broken the party apart due to him moving more towards the center, and the umbrella group, which is the more leftist faction within the party, saying we've had enough of this, and they are moving to create their own political party.
Absolutely, and this just goes to show even further the disconnect between Greeks on the ground and what they desire and what the government in Athens is actually going about doing.
Yeah, I mean, you're also seeing this come at a pretty pressing time where the opposition normally would be taking advantage of the current drop in popularity that the Greek government has faced due to the natural disasters, the economic crisis, immigration crisis, and of course the climate crisis that have all been impacting Greece. And New Democracy has kind of been scrambling to find a message that sticks and find policy that works to address these issues. And right now, rather than taking advantage of that, the left is fracturing and infighting.
Absolutely. And that's going to continue to last.
Yes.
The next story regards a corruption investigation into the Turkish consulate in New York City threatens the mayor of New York City.
Yes. Yeah, we're looking at the FBI and Manhattan prosecutors launching an investigation into whether Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, has essentially pushed the fire department to clear the construction of the new Turkish General Consulate high-rise building in the city, in spite of it not meeting the safety requirements.
Yeah, and he's also been allegedly involved in some illegal fueling and funneling of foreign money into the project and into other projects, which could lead to his campaign being tarnished and his reputation as the mayor of New York City being tarnished as well.
Yeah, and it comes at an awful time for Adams, who's been struggling with kind of trying to strike a tone in the city because he's gotten a lot of flack from progressives, which are a really critical group in the city that influence a lot of the politics. So this is just going to add more fuel to the fire for progressives to oust him in the next election.
Yeah, and it's also coming back to the Eastern Mediterranean regionally, it's important as well because Turkey needs a foothold in the United States as a consulate building. It's important to have that diplomatic line of communication, but it's also important to have a very well formed and well looking consulate building because if you it's a show of diplomatic legitimacy. If you have a well-to-do consulate building right next to the United Nations building, which this new Turkish consulate is, it's full glass building with some nice design, then it gives you a little bit more diplomatic legitimacy, something that Turkey desperately needs when it comes to the U.S. and its foreign politics.
Yeah, I mean, when President Erdogan was at the opening ceremony of this new consulate building, he said that it was, to paraphrase him, it was like new development and new power for Turkey on the global stage.
Absolutely. And that's the message and the imagery that they've been trying to pass on this entire year. Thank you again for listening to this week's Eastern Mediterranean Times newsletter. I've been Martin Mont.
And I'm Joshua Lithke.
Have a great weekend.